Hey runners, just another running coach here. Today we're going to take on the great debate between stride length and stride rate, also known as cadence. Which is better to focus on improving to make you a faster, stronger, and safer runner? When we think of running, most people tend to imagine that tall, lanky runners with a vast wingspan and stride length will always have more potential to run faster because they can literally cover more distance in the same number of steps. But on the contrary, the average height of a male elite marathoner is actually 5'8", below the average height for men in the US. So what's going on here, and how can us, mere mortals, benefit from their example? Let's dive in. First, let's go over some quick definitions. Technically, stride length is the total distance that we cover from the moment we land with one foot to the moment that same foot hits the ground again. In other words, it's not the distance of one step, but actually two steps left and right together. Step length is what we would call the distance between when your left foot lands and your right foot lands, just one step. That being said, both terms are very frequently used interchangeably to refer to one step. And for the sake of simplicity in this video, when I say stride length, what I'm really referring to is the distance we travel during one step only. Now, on the other side of the coin, stride rate, or cadence, measures how often our feet hit the ground, typically measured in how many steps we take per minute. So essentially our debate is it better to focus on developing a longer stride, or is it better to focus on your leg turnover so you can run more frequent strides? Fortunately, there is a pretty clear answer, and to find that answer, we're going to get down and dirty with some good old math. So as we may or may not know, long distance running from the mile all the way to the marathon and beyond is an aerobic sport, meaning we rely on oxygen as our main source of energy. And as we all know too well, running is also a high impact sport, meaning that power we generate pushing off the ground often comes right back to us in the form of shock waves to our muscles, joints, and soft tissues. The faster we run, the harder we tend to hit the ground, the faster we accumulate blood lactate in the muscles. Therefore, the faster we run, the faster we feel fatigued. I think we can all relate to that. Now, keeping that in mind, we're going to do a simple equation. Now, while your stride length is going to differ based on your height and pace, most experts agree that regardless of that, maintaining a stride rate of 180 to 190 steps per minute, which is about 3 steps per second, is ideal for efficiency. This means that if we want to run an 8-minute mile and we're maintaining that golden stride rate of 180 steps per minute, we're going to be pushing off the ground 1,440 times, and our legs are going to be absorbing 1,440 landing shocks each time we hit the ground, usually at a force 3 times our body weight. If you're cringing at that thought, trust me, you're not alone. But as a side note, if you do the same calculation for the longest run you've ever completed, it can actually really make you appreciate just how strong and resilient your body is. Now, if we compare our 8-minute mile with a 7-minute mile and maintain the exact same stride rate of 180, this time we're only hitting 1,260 steps total. That's almost 200 less times we have to push off the ground and absorb the landing shock. Yet, it takes significantly more effort than the 8-minute mile. It seems like we'd be saving energy rather than spending more because we're doing less steps. But because we have to cover the same total distance in less time, each individual stride has to be just a little bit longer than before. For our 8-minute mile, our average stride length would be about 1.11 meters, and for our 7-minute mile, our average stride length would need to be about 1.28 meters. That might not sound like a whole lot of a difference, but remember, this is something that you're doing for over 1,000 times. So even a tiny little change can have a big impact over thousands of repetitions. And every additional mile is adding thousands and thousands more. The key thing to understand is that even with those 200 or so extra strides that we need to run for our 8-minute mile compared to the 7-minute mile, the total power in watts, yeah, we're getting really sciencey now, the total power in watts that our muscles need to generate shorter strides is far less than the total power required to perform fewer longer strides. Hence the reason a 7-minute mile is always going to feel tougher than an 8-minute mile. So going back to our debate of stride length versus cadence, one could argue that if your stride rate is already at 180 steps per minute, having a longer stride is technically going to improve your speed. But there are a couple of caveats to this. One, there's a big difference between using strength to increase your stride length and changing your running form to have a longer gait cycle. In general, we want to be really, really careful when we make changes to our running form, and overstriding, which is when you land with your foot in front of your hips, is a really easy way to get hurt because landing this way forces your quads and hamstrings to react with an abrupt braking force, like slamming the brakes when you hit a red light. Really bad for the knees and really bad for the hips. On the other hand, short, powerful strides that land directly underneath our hips can cover just as much distance without the same risks. And we can improve that push-off strength by doing speed work, drills, and resistance training in the gym or at home. The second caveat is, unless you've gone out of your way to practice hitting 180 steps per minute, it's very likely that you aren't, and your stride length is already too long as it is. And that's okay. For a lot of runners, a stride rate of 180 can feel kind of frantic and kind of weird at first, but once you get used to it, it's not only a safer way to run because it keeps your stride more compact and helps you avoid overextending, but it'll also make you faster while costing less energy because you'll have a more efficient stride. It's a win-win. Now, if that seems like a totally outrageous claim, let's do one more equation. We're gonna run our 8-minute mile one more time, and this time, instead of 180 steps per minute, we're gonna run it at a stride rate of 160 steps per minute, which is a very common stride rate for new runners and faster runners who are getting faster by lengthening their gait cycle. It's not a huge difference, right? But when all is said and done, the difference is nearly identical to the difference between our 7-minute mile and 8-minute mile. Our stride rate of 160 gets us 1,280 total strides, and stride length averages out to 1.25 meters. So even though this is admittedly a bit of an oversimplification, it would theoretically cost a runner just as much energy to run an 8-minute mile at 160 steps per minute as it would a 7-minute mile at a more preferable stride rate. Pretty mind-blowing by itself, but especially mind-blowing if you apply it to longer distances. By the way, if you ever want to practice hitting that golden 180 stride rate, you can count to 3 for each second on your watch because 3 steps per second gets you 180. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Or you can practice running to a metronome. As annoying as that sounds, the good news is it doesn't take long for your muscle memory to catch on. That's all for today. I hope you found this video helpful and enjoyable despite all the number crunching. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment and stay tuned for more training related videos. Until next time, happy running.